Welcome back. And as we discussed in the prior lecture, qualitative research can be like a light in the darkness, helping us to make sense of what's around us. But one problem with projecting light onto dark things is that it can create shadows and illusions that might make sense to us as observers as we begin to try to figure out what they are, but they're not real. And in social science research, taking what we know about the world and using it to explain the actions and intentions of others is a form of projection. And that's where we take what we are seeing and thinking as observers and try to put that on the other things or contexts that we're observing. And one way to think about this projection is to think about going to the movies in a theater. And I know that's a rare experience nowadays, but think about going to a theater where a projector is able to cut through near pitch darkness with a beam of light and turn a piece of screen that's hung on a wall into something that's far more interesting and enchanting than if you were just sitting there with the lights on. The result is that something very plain takes on incredible new characteristics that are observable by anyone that's sitting in the room. And while movies might seem magical and interesting from that observer's point of view, movies are traditionally created by just taking flat projections of still images and recorded sounds and putting them together to create stories in the minds of the viewers where none existed before. The light from the projector not only creates a new reality for the viewer, but it also becomes a reality that's even experienced differently, subjectively, by every observer, and which ultimately can even lead to passionate arguments about whether or not that movie was any good. Psychological projection works much the same way. When we are in an experience where we lack information about an individual or we're having difficulty interpreting their meaning, our minds project meaning onto others and help us to interpret them in a context we can understand. But that meaning often comes from inside of us, not from the external environment that we're observing. So we have to be careful, particularly when we are researchers. Our ability to project is extremely dangerous when we're looking at other things we don't understand. And one area where it can be extremely dangerous is when we're confronted with data that we don't understand. And this can happen in all sorts of avenues in life, ranging from trivial things, like how we think about movie reviews, to generally unimportant, but sometimes quite important things like how we respond to economic news, or maybe public health data during a pandemic, or things like that, and how those things shape our behavior. So let's talk about customer satisfaction scores for a moment, because they're a common area that most marketing researchers are going to deal with during their career. And to protect the identities of anyone who might be guilty here of delivering really lousy customer service, I'm going to refer to a fictional service provider called Cabletown. So Cabletown is a national provider of cable, high-speed internet, and telephone services, and like most cable companies, Cabletown has an abysmal level of customer service quality. Everyone knows that when you have a problem with Cabletown, it is difficult to get it resolved quickly or easily. And everyone also knows that when you call Cabletown and try to cancel or change your service, you're going to sit through a high-pressure sales pitch before you get the help you're requesting, because the CSRs, the customer service representatives, have been taught to try to sell customer service to customers who are calling in regarding problems instead of just dealing with those problems directly. So the word of mouth among customers and the perception that customers have is that Cabletown is just the worst. Nobody likes dealing with them. They're a necessary evil. If you want to have cable and internet service, they're the ones you deal with. But what you don't know, because you don't work there, is that Cabletown takes customer service very seriously internally, and they've actually designed a variety of metrics to measure their customer service at discrete touch points in the process. Most of their satisfaction metrics are derived from surveys administered to those who call into the call center. And as it happens, those metrics have shown consistent growth every year, from 40% of customers expressing overall satisfaction 3 years ago to 78% in the last year. And from an internal perspective, Cabletown is absolutely killing it at customer service. And the manager in charge of the customer service division is on track to become a VP or CEO because of it. And the word of mouth perceptions about Cabletown, that they are doing a terrible job at customer service, are believed to be false. Just a few disgruntled customers that are sharing that perspective. As a result of these high performance metrics, Cabletown's philosophy has become following the 80-20 rule. Focus on satisfying 80% of their customers to try to keep the remaining 20% from causing too much damage. And the conventional wisdom is that there's always going to be about 20% of customers for whom you can never do enough to make them happy. And they've actually even gone and done account reviews and shown that these 20% of customers are actually more costly to serve because they cause 80% of the problems. They complain often, they have frequent issues with equipment, They often demand discounts for service, and they're generally rude to the CSRs on the phone. Cabletown is happy to have them as customers, but they're also not going to cry if they go on to become a competitor's problem. Internally, these customers are referred to as the Gimme Jimmies, and that's because of their tendency to demand free or reduced cost service. And as that term has grown more accepted, the Jimmies have taken on other characteristics internally. Stories have been told about them, like they're cheapskates, they have no jobs, that they're loudmouths, that they live in the rural areas and they speak with a country accent. They have a poor level of education, and often they have poor personal hygiene. These characteristics are further enhanced by service call technicians' stories about serving the Jimmies out in the field, often with a lot of humorous detail. Every executive has heard these stories. They often joke about them at meetings, and they craft elaborate strategies about how they can get the Jimmies to cancel their service, head to a competitor, and sabotage the competitor's business by being terrible customers there. If someone new to the company points out that the conventional wisdom of serving these customers may be flawed, those who have been around for a while shrug it off and just say, look, we've looked into this, and believe me, you're going to figure out sooner or later that we're right here. Nobody ever entertains the idea of looking into how Jimmy's can be served better. Now, here's the really crummy part in all of this. Cabletown has rigged its phone system to give priority to customers who have expressed higher satisfaction scores before, and they put them through to an operator and make and give them faster service, while they make those with lower satisfaction scores spend a longer time in the phone tree and in the queues. The reason for this is entirely practical. Happy customers spend more and they're easier to sell to, while the Jimmies spend less. They cost more to serve and they generally don't want service add-ons. By simply making this prioritization, the customer service department has managed to increase its revenues and maintain its high level of customer service, in part because the Jimmies get frustrated and drop off the calls. Now, if you're paying attention, you might have caught a few details that lead you to realize that something is amiss here. First of all, Cabletown is absolutely loathed by the public, but it's given itself a false sense of confidence internally through these metrics and through these stories that they have begun to tell themselves. It started off with good intentions by trying to improve customer service, but they created a system in which they control the metrics that they're measuring by focusing on surveys administered during call center experiences, which they control. And that metric is really terrible because it assumes that the data that come in are representative of the customer base, when in reality, it's representative of the people who take surveys on customer service calls, which are generally the people who are really happy, who had a good experience, who are empathetic to the representative who served them, or in some cases who are truly angry and want to be heard, and who are willing to sit through a survey in order to express that anger. Everybody else gets left out. Next, Cabletown has set up a can't-win scenario with its angriest customers, and it's not only decided to make it harder to serve them, but also to turn them into caricatures that the internal staff can make fun of and disregard. Because they've set up a threshold that says that 20% of the people that they deal with fit into this category, they're minimizing the group and ignoring the simple truth that for every 5 customers who call in with a problem, 1 is going to get treated like dirt. Their artificial construction ignores the customer experience that's likely driving a pattern of churn, and once marginally satisfied customers become dissatisfied or labeled with the pejorative term of gimme jimmies and then practically encouraged to leave, that's exactly what they're going to do. Where churn exists, growth is difficult to achieve. And what Cabletown is actually doing is creating lifelong detractors who will eventually not only leave for a competitor, but also leave the category altogether when they can, searching for alternatives to the services that they provide. Finally, Cabletown has based all of these opinions on quantitative measurements that are not only not reflective of any semblance of reality, but which are based on standards that they decided based upon their desire to improve an existing system. Remember, in the public eye, far more than 20% of consumers in Cabletown's market think of them as a terrible company. Anecdotally, it seems like everybody hates them, but their internal data tell them the story that they want to hear and allow them to project an ugly image onto their detractors. In their minds, consumers who dislike Cabletown either fit the Gimme Jimmy customer profile or are non-customers who've already severed ties and who just like to complain. Now, my example is fictional, but it's actually a very real problem that exists throughout the corporate world. And if you haven't already encountered it, I promise you, you will come across it either in case studies or in work that you're going to do for major organizations, or more likely in practice at mid-sized or smaller organizations. I have seen it personally. I have read about it. I know it exists. And this is not far off from reality. So, how do you defeat this sort of thinking? Well, as we've noted, you don't try to combat it by drilling down on every available opinion out there, because you just simply can't. There are too many opinions, and you're never going to get to a point where you can hear what everybody has to say. The amount of data that you'll generate is overwhelming, and the amount of time that you're going to spend filtering out the signal from the noise is going to drive you to madness. What you need in a situation like this is a change of perspective that helps you shed your projections and redefine your understanding. What you need is something that puts the numbers into proper context and which helps you to understand how they relate to the real world, not just your imagined impression of it. What you need is something that helps you to see in the dark and to illuminate your path so you don't stumble, that you don't leap at shadows, and you don't let a trick of light deceive you into observing what isn't actually there. That solution, of course, is qualitative research. And in the next lecture, I'm going to explain how and when to use it precisely for this purpose.